I never imagined the day would come when someone I opened my heart and home to would look me in the eye and tell me to leave. Not just someone, but my daughter-in-law. The woman my son loved, the woman I treated like my own, stood in my living room, arms crossed and eyes cold, and said, "You need to move out. This is our house now." My hands trembled. I wasn't sure if it was from the sting of her words or the sheer shock that someone could be so cruel. Our house? No. This was the house my husband and I built brick by brick over 37 years of marriage. The house where I raised my son, fed him soup when he was sick, tucked him in when he had nightmares, and celebrated every birthday and milestone under that roof. And now, the woman who'd only been a part of our lives for a few years wanted me gone, like I was an unwelcome guest. It didn't start this way, of course. When Arjun brought Priya home for the first time, I was cautious, as any mother would be, but I welcomed her with warmth. She was polite, reserved, and eager to please. She brought sweets, complimented my cooking, even called me Ma before she was technically part of the family. I thought she truly cared. I thought we were building something. Maybe not the storybook mother-daughter relationship, but something grounded in mutual respect. But people change, or maybe they just reveal themselves over time. After my husband passed away 2 years ago, I felt the weight of loneliness press down on me harder than ever before. Arjun and Priya had been living abroad for work, but they returned to India shortly after the funeral. They said they wanted to be closer to family, to support me, and I, in my grief, thought their return was a blessing. I offered them the upper floor of the house to live in. I insisted they not worry about rent or utilities. I even handed over management of some of the household expenses to make things easier for them. I was simply grateful to have family around again. At first, things were fine. Quiet dinners, shared chores, occasional laughter echoing through the halls. But slowly, subtly, things began to shift. Priya would leave the room when I entered. She'd roll her eyes at my suggestions or make passive-aggressive comments about old-fashioned ways. Arjun, always glued to his laptop, barely noticed. Or maybe he chose not to. And then one morning, she stood at the kitchen doorway, arms folded, lips pursed, and said it, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "It's time for you to consider moving out, Ma. This house isn't suited for 3 adults. We need our privacy. We're thinking of renovating it. Make it more modern. You could look into an old-age home nearby." My heart dropped. Old-age home? The walls felt like they were closing in. I looked at my son, expecting him to speak up, to defend me. But he didn't. He just looked down at his phone and muttered, "It's for the best, Ma." I felt like I was being erased from my own life. I didn't argue. I didn't cry, not in front of them. I just nodded, turned away, and walked to my room, each step heavier than the last. But something shifted in me that day. Something inside me went cold. I had loved them, trusted them, and they repaid me with this betrayal? No, I wasn't going to let them shove me out of my own home like I was some inconvenience. I wasn't weak, not anymore. They thought they had won, that I would quietly pack my things and disappear. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. I may have been a grieving widow, but I was also the woman who built this family from the ground up. And now, I was going to take it all back. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. I walked around my own home like a stranger. Every room echoed with memories. My husband fixing a shelf in the hallway, my son chasing the dog through the living room, Diwali lights hanging from the balcony. But now, it all felt distant, like someone had taken a paintbrush soaked in resentment and brushed over every joyful memory with cold, gray indifference. I began to see what I had missed before. Priya wasn't just trying to push me out. She had been planning this for months. The signs were all there, scattered like breadcrumbs, but I had been too blinded by my desire for family to notice. The sudden interest in home renovations, the quiet phone calls she took in the guest room, the way she began referring to the house as ours instead of yours when speaking to Arjun. She had a vision, and I wasn't in it. She started taking control of everything. Groceries, bills, even who was allowed to visit. My friends started calling less. One even confessed hesitantly that Priya had made it clear they should call ahead before dropping by, because Ma gets overwhelmed easily these days. Overwhelmed? I wasn't senile. I wasn't frail. I still ran morning errands, handled all the kitchen work, kept the home running. But Priya had begun painting me as a burden, slowly, subtly, like an artist sketching a villain in the background of her perfect life. What hurt the most was Arjun. My son, my only child, had always been quiet, but he had a kind heart. I used to think nothing could come between us, but I was wrong. He'd become distant, unrecognizable. Where once he would sit and have chai with me on the veranda, now he barely made eye contact. His responses were short, mechanical. I'm busy. Ask Priya. We'll talk later. Later never came. He wasn't just neglecting me. He was complicit. Whether he realized it or not, he had handed his mother over like an old relic, taking up too much space. And Priya, well, she didn't hesitate to make me feel like a trespasser. One evening, I found her in my kitchen, rearranging shelves. Why are you moving the dishes? I asked. Oh, we're getting a modular kitchen installed next month, she said casually, without even turning around. It'll be easier for us when you're gone. Us, gone, like I was already out of the picture. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I haven't agreed to move. She gave me a smile, sharp and practiced. It's not about agreement, Ma. It's about what's best for everyone. Everyone. Everyone except me. I felt the pressure building inside me. Grief, anger, disbelief, all tangled in a knot that sat heavy in my chest. How did I end up here? In a house full of familiar things, feeling like an outsider. I thought about my husband. What he would say if he were here. He had been the firm one, the anchor. He wouldn't have tolerated this. He would have protected me. But he was gone, and I had let that grief soften me, made me vulnerable. I had trusted too easily, but that trust had been shattered. And now, the people I had poured my love into were tearing me down like I was nothing. Like I hadn't sacrificed, supported, nurtured them every step of the way. Like I didn't matter anymore. I went to bed that night in tears, but when I woke up the next morning, something had changed. The helplessness had turned into something else. Resolve. If they wanted to treat me like I was disposable, like some relic of the past, they were in for a surprise. I had been silent long enough. It was time to act, not with anger, not with pleading, but with clarity and strength. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought I was too old, too emotional, too weak. They were wrong. This wasn't just about a house. It wasn't even just about me. It was about dignity, about self-worth, about the years I had poured into building something real, a family, a home, a legacy, only to watch it be stripped away like it meant nothing. I wasn't just being pushed out of a building. I was being erased from my own life. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not the wild, uncontrolled anger that burns fast and dies even faster, but the deep, simmering kind that takes root, the kind that grows in silence, that sharpens your focus, the kind of anger that changes things. I started seeing clearly, maybe for the first time in months. I had given them everything. After my husband died, I could have sold the house, moved into a smaller flat, lived quietly. But I didn't. I thought Arjun and Priya would benefit from the stability. I thought it would bring us closer as a family. I even added Arjun's name to the property deed, thinking I was securing his future. His future, not mine. That was my mistake. I had been too trusting, too generous, too naive. Now Priya wanted the house without the woman who built it. But what really broke me was thinking of what message this would send, not just to me, but to any woman who had given her life to others, only to be discarded when she was no longer useful. How many women like me were out there? Mothers who raised children only to be told they were too much trouble. Widows who were made to feel like they were standing in the way of a new, shinier life. Elders shuffled away into silence, labeled as emotional or old-fashioned, just because they dared to speak. This was personal, yes, but it was also symbolic. Because if I allowed them to push me aside, if I gave in quietly, what did that say? That I had no value? That love and loyalty were transactional? That a lifetime of sacrifice meant nothing? I thought of the nights I'd stayed up with Arjun during his exams, his illness, his heartbreaks. I remembered standing in temple lines, at dawn, praying for his success, watching him graduate with tears in my eyes. I remembered Priya's first Diwali with us, when I gifted her my own mother's gold bangles, telling her, "Now you're part of our family." And for what? For them to treat me like I was a tenant overstaying her welcome? No, that wasn't going to be the ending of my story. I had more at stake than just a house. This was about reclaiming my voice, my strength, my rightful place. Not just for me, but for every woman who had been silenced in her own home. I wasn't going to play the victim anymore, and I wasn't going to walk away quietly. They thought they had me cornered, that I had no options, no fight left in me. But I still had one thing they underestimated: experience. I had seen life. I had survived loss. I had built a family from the ground up, and now I was going to use every bit of that wisdom to protect what was mine and teach them a lesson they'd never forget. I was done crying, done waiting, done hoping they'd come around. They had made their choice. Now it was my turn to make mine, and I was going to do it with precision, with patience, and with power. They thought I was done, but what they didn't know was that while they were busy celebrating their quiet victory, I had already begun putting my plan in motion. I wasn't going to scream or beg or make a scene. No. That's what people like Priya expect: emotional outbursts they can use to justify their actions. I was going to take a different route, one they'd never see coming. First, I reached out to an old friend, Mira. She and I had lost touch over the years, but I knew she'd gone into property law after her husband passed. We met at a small cafe in town. As soon as I explained what was happening, her eyes narrowed. "They're trying to force you out of a house you legally own?" she asked, almost disbelieving. I nodded. I added Arjun's name to the deed 2 years ago. I thought I was helping him. Mira leaned in, her tone sharpening. "Joint ownership doesn't mean you lose your rights. You've lived there for decades, and unless there's a legal transfer of your share, they can't force you out, especially not without due process." That was the first bit of clarity I needed. They couldn't just throw me out. So the next step was about strategy. I needed to gather proof, not just of Priya's manipulations, but of Arjun's negligence too. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about defending myself with facts, not emotion. I began documenting everything. Every conversation, every message, every insult disguised as advice. I kept a journal of their behavior: how Priya changed the locks to the upstairs kitchen, how she told guests I was transitioning out of the house, how Arjun ignored my requests for family discussions. I even installed a discreet audio recorder in the living room, something Mira suggested. "They're bold enough to try pushing you out? Then let them speak freely. That's your leverage." And speak they did. One evening, I captured Priya telling a friend on the phone, "Once she's gone, we'll tear down the ground floor and get it redone. I don't want any trace of her left." Her voice was clear, smug. She even laughed. That recording was all I needed to remind myself I was doing the right thing. Then I moved to the finances. I began requesting detailed statements from the bank. I noticed that Arjun had quietly started dipping into the joint account my husband and I had built. Money meant for emergencies, for family upkeep. He'd been using it for personal expenses, travel, and even a new investment account under Priya's name. Another friend, Sunil, helped me with the digital trail. He worked in finance and had access to tools that made tracking transfers easy. "You've got them," he said after going through the data. "This isn't just unethical. could be considered financial abuse. That word, abuse, hit me hard, because that's what it was. Not physical, not loud, but subtle, constant erosion of dignity, power, and safety. The kind people rarely talk about. The kind that hides behind smiles and polite words. With everything in hand, I began consulting with Mira more formally. We discussed legal angles, property rights, and the steps required to issue a notice of partition, essentially forcing the legal division of the house. And I wouldn't stop there. If they want to fight, I said, they'll get one, but on my terms. And the final part of my plan? Exposure. I started reaching out to extended family, quietly, carefully. I invited my sister-in-law for tea, then my niece, then a few old neighbors. I didn't badmouth Priya. I didn't have to. I let the facts speak for themselves. By the time the 4th week rolled around, the narrative had shifted. People were talking. Whispers had started. Questions were being asked. Why is she being asked to leave? Didn't she give them that house? What kind of son allows that? I wasn't just reclaiming my space. I was reclaiming the truth. Let them smile in public and pretend nothing's wrong. Let them plan their renovations and imagine a future without me. Because soon, everything they had built on deception was going to collapse. And I'd be the one pulling the first thread. Once the wheels were in motion, I realized how much power I had, how much any woman in my situation could have, if she only knew where to look and how to move. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about setting an example. First, I took control of the narrative, inside the house. I stopped reacting emotionally to Priya's provocations. When she made cutting remarks or tried to exclude me, I simply nodded and left the room. No arguments, no outbursts, just silence. And it rattled her. Because people like her feed on control, and silence makes them nervous. Next, I handled the finances. I visited the bank in person. With Mira's help, I froze all further withdrawals from the joint savings account that still held my name. I made sure no further transfers could happen without my explicit consent. When the manager saw the forged signature on one of the transfers, yes, Priya had even tried that, he grew visibly concerned. I'd like to speak to the bank's legal team, I told him calmly, because this may be more serious than just a misunderstanding. That single sentence changed everything. Within a day, I received an apology from the bank manager and a formal hold on the account. Arjun must have been stunned when he tried to access the funds and found himself locked out. Then came the legal notice. Mira drafted a formal partition notice and had it delivered to the house. I was in the kitchen when Arjun opened it. I watched from the hallway as he read it, eyes widening, color draining from his face. "What is this?" he finally asked, holding the letter like it was poison. "It's a notice," I replied evenly. "Since you and I are joint owners, I've asked for a legal division of the house. That way, we can both have clarity on our rights and responsibilities." "But you don't need to do this," he stammered. "Oh, I do," I said. "You made that clear when you chose to stand by and let your wife treat me like a burden." Priya stormed into the room next, voice rising, face flushed with rage. "You're tearing the family apart." I looked at her, calm as ever. "No, you did that when you tried to erase me." After that, I began preparing to separate physically, as well. I moved my things into the guest room and locked the door. I installed a bolt on the inside just to feel safe. I cooked for myself. I stopped attending family dinners, and I refused to clean up after them, do their laundry, or serve them tea. I wasn't their housemaid. I was their equal, or perhaps something even more valuable if they'd ever cared to notice. Meanwhile, the support from extended family continued to build. A few brave relatives began calling Arjun directly, questioning his choices. One aunt even told him, "If your father were alive, he'd be ashamed." Arjun didn't respond, but I knew he heard every word. His shame began to show in the way he avoided eye contact, the way he tiptoed around me like a stranger in his own home. Good. Let the weight of his actions settle in. I also arranged a small gathering with some family and old friends. I didn't speak bitterly. I simply told the truth. Calmly. Clearly. I built this house with my husband, I said. I welcomed my daughter-in-law like my own. And now, they want me out. But I've decided I won't go quietly. Because I have the right to be here. And more importantly, I have the right to be respected. That night, a few of the women came up to me with tears in their eyes. "Thank you," one whispered. "You said what so many of us feel, but never dare to say." And that's when I realized this wasn't just my fight. It was a fight for every mother, every widow, every woman who'd been made to feel like she didn't belong in her own home. I wasn't just protecting my roof, I was protecting my roots. They had tried to silence me. But now, my voice was the loudest thing in the house. It all came to a head one Saturday morning. The atmosphere was unusually still, like the house itself was holding its breath. Arjun and Priya were seated at the dining table, avoiding my gaze, pretending everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. That morning, I had scheduled a family mediation meeting at the house with a lawyer. Mira joined me, documents in hand, and two neutral family elders sat down to observe. This wasn't going to be an ambush. It was going to be a reckoning. I began simply. I have loved this home. I've loved this family. I've done everything I could to build something stable after your father passed, Arjun. But what I've endured the past few months, it's not something any mother should go through. Arjun looked uncomfortable, eyes darting to Priya. She didn't flinch. She crossed her arms, defiant as ever. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the bank records, transaction trails, the audio recording, and the formal property documents, marked with my and Arjun's names as co-owners. You've taken money from a joint account without consent. You've tried to isolate me from the home I created. And you, Priya, I turned to her, my voice steady, have spoken openly about erasing me from this house like I'm a stain. I've had enough. She opened her mouth to speak, but Mira cut in. If Mrs. Sharma were to take this to court, and believe me, she has every right, this would be considered elder financial and emotional abuse that carries serious legal consequences. Arjun's face turned pale. Mom, I didn't mean for any of this. You didn't stop any of it, I said, cutting him off. That's worse. I looked at the elders, one of whom had known my late husband. I never imagined I'd have to defend my place in my own home. But here I am. They nodded slowly, visibly shaken by the evidence. Then, I delivered my final offer. I'm not leaving this house. Legally, I don't have to, and morally, I won't. But I'm willing to divide the home. You two can live upstairs. I will remain downstairs. We'll formalize it in writing. Separate entrances, separate lives. Priya's mouth fell open. You're serious? As serious as you were when you told your friend you'd erase all traces of me. The silence that followed was thick. Finally, one of the elders leaned forward. She's right. She's being more than fair. Arjun had no choice but to agree. He signed the agreement 2 days later. Priya refused to look at me for a week after, but I didn't need her to. I wasn't doing this for her forgiveness, or even her understanding. I was doing it for me, and the moment that document was signed, I felt something I hadn't in months: peace. I had stood up. I had protected what was mine. I had demanded respect not with screaming matches or broken plates, but with truth, preparation, and quiet strength. A few weeks later, Priya began to change her tone. She was more polite, even made tea one afternoon, and left it outside my door. But by then, I had learned not to read too much into gestures. Change, if it comes at all, has to be earned, not offered as a bribe for silence. Arjun started visiting me more. Sometimes he'd sit quietly in the garden with me, staring at the old mango tree his father had planted. I didn't say much. He didn't either. But something unspoken passed between us. Regret, maybe, or gratitude, or both. And me? I started living again. I joined a women's group at the local community center. I began tutoring neighborhood kids. I redecorated my part of the house with colors I loved. Bright, unapologetic, full of life. Because I had found something worth more than any house or heirloom. My voice, my power, my peace. So if you ever find yourself being erased in your own life, remember this. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight dirty to win. And you don't have to walk away unless you choose to. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stay and make them reckon with the woman they tried to silence.